Welcome to the 12 Poems of Christmas podcast. This Christmas season, let's gather around the fire and discuss 12 poems that explore the beauty and mystery of Christmas. I'm Ryan Reed.
And I'm Brandon Yates.
And this is the 12 Poems of Christmas podcast. Well, welcome back to the 12 Poems of Christmas podcast. We do hope that you enjoyed our inaugural episode on T.S. Eliot. Today, I'm here once again with Brandon Yates. Hey, Brandon.
Hello.
You doing good today?
Yeah, doing great.
Good. I really enjoyed how we came in hot with our Spider-Man 2 reference.
Yes.
What did Doc Ock say about T.S. Eliot?
So it's a scene where Peter's having problems with Mary Jane as he does in in the mid 2000s Spider-Man movies. And the advice that Doc Ock gives him is that he should read her poetry because that's how he connected with his wife. It's actually a very sweet scene where he's saying he's recalling his courtship with his wife, and he was saying that she was trying to explain to him. He was trying to explain advanced science, and she was trying to explain T.S. Eliot, and he didn't understand T.S. Eliot. So.
Well, now our readers understand T.S. Eliot a little bit better.
Yeah.
So read that to your significant other and see if you win some romance points.
Yes.
Well, today we're going back in time a little bit further than the 1900s. In fact, we're going to go back to the time of John Donne. John Donne was in the 17th century, and he was born. I say that he was born around 1571. He was a poet and a priest. He wrote in a literary movement called metaphysical poetry, and he wrote several poems of various things: love poems, religious poems, elegies, satires, and he's also known for his sermons, for preaching. He has a lot to give us as an Anglican deacon and a priest. Some of his strongest poetry is his divine poems. And so that's what we want to talk today as we look at his second divine poem called the Annunciation. So when we say Annunciation, Brandon, you want to explain a little bit about what the Annunciation is? The event?
The event.
Of the Annunciation. It's a big word, right?
Yes, it is a big word.
It just simply...
It's announcing.
Right, the
something.
announcing,
yes,
right?
It's the announcing. Yes.
Sorry, I was almost like a trick question.
It felt like a trick question.
Yeah.
I was like, it sounds like announcing.
You gave me the deer in the headlight look.
Yeah.
Hey now, don't ask me about Annunciation.
Yeah, that's not exactly the word I use a lot. Yeah, so the announcing, the proclamation.
Right, and in the Christmas story, this specific announcement is the announcement of Gabriel to Mary. Mm-hmm. And another iconic scene in the Christmas story. Don't you love how when God gave us a story, he didn't give us a story that is halfway done, right? The Christmas story is just amazing from start to finish. Yeah. And it begins with Gabriel coming and meeting with Mary, who is a young teenager, and he tells her the announcement of now you will become pregnant. Mm-hmm. The Holy Spirit will overshadow you, and the child that will be born to you will be God's son, the Messiah. Yeah. What an announcement to make. So, you think about today, we have elaborate ways of announcing births, our gender reveal parties and whatnot, which some of them can be really funny how bad they go. Mm-hmm. If you're burning down the yard to reveal the gender, that's probably not the best choice to make. But here, what an announcement. What a shock to Mary. And then what is Mary's response to this? She replies, I am the Lord's maidservant. So let's see what John Donne has to say about this. We'll jump right into the poem. The Annunciation. Salvation to all that will is nigh, that all which always is all everywhere, which cannot sin, and yet all sins must bear, which cannot die, yet cannot choose but die. Lo, faithful virgin, yields himself to lie in prison in thy womb. And though he there can take no sin, nor thou give, yet he will wear, taken from thence, flesh, which death's force may try. Ere by the spear's time was created, thou wast in his mind, who is thy son and brother, whom thou conceived. Yea, thou art now thy maker's maker, and thy father's mother. Thou hast light and dark, and shuttest in little room, immensity cloistered in thy dear womb. Brandon, I'll let you go ahead and jump right in and get us started.
Yeah, well, I think this one of the when we look at the incarnation, I think we see this picture of this great mystery of God becoming man, and what does that mean? And I love, though, that as he goes down, and this kind of came as you're reading it, the line says, "Which cannot die, yet cannot choose but die." And then we see, "Lo, faithful virgin yields himself to lie." I think that when we see the incarnation, that's God's choice. Like, it's not nothing's happening to him. He is deciding. Right. He yields himself to he empties himself. As Philippians 2 says. And
I think piggybacking on that, I think there are two misconceptions when we talk about Jesus. One is that sometimes we think about as if Jesus comes upon the scene in Matthew chapter 1 and is not present in Genesis through Malachi. And yet we know Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, that he is very God of very God. As the Nicene Creed says, he is light from light, eternal. So Jesus, there has never been a time when Jesus was not. That being said, the other misconception is often you'll hear this in atheistic circles, where they say something to the tune of, "The cross is divine child abuse. Why would God do something like that to his son?" And what that fails to understand is, one, the nature of God, as he is one, as anything that God does can be said to be done by all of the Trinity, all the Godhead. The Godhead does not act on its no person of the Godhead acts by himself. This is what we call inseparable operations. And so the acts of the Spirit can be said to be the acts of all the Godhead. The acts of the Son, the same. And so first, it fails to understand that aspect of it. Secondly, it fails to take into account that Jesus wasn't forced on the cross. Jesus wasn't forced into human flesh. This was something that he did willingly out of love for us. So even beginning, salvation to all that will is nigh, that all which always is all everywhere, which cannot sin. So obviously, as we get to the third line, it should be clear to us that we're talking about the second person of the Trinity, Jesus. He is the one who cannot sin, and yet he's going to be the sin bearer. This is what Paul tells us, right? He who is without sin, God has made a sin offering for us. And then, as you pointed out, which cannot die and yet cannot choose but die. Here, Jesus, in his eternal nature, is undying. God cannot die because God is God. And yet, by taking on human flesh, Jesus can offer up his body for us. He can experience death and go down into the grave. And he does this for us. Continuing on with the next line, "Lo, faithful virgin, yields himself to lie in prison in thy womb, and though he were there, can take no sin, nor thou give, yet he will wear, taken from thence flesh, which death's force may try." I love this, the idea of Jesus taking on human flesh, because when Jesus takes on human flesh, it does limit him, right? We've talked about this with some of our kids talking about this, is flesh is limiting in the sense of Jesus steps into time and then limits himself in time. Not only does he limit himself in time, he limits himself in space. So the infant child was only where the infant child was. He was only in Bethlehem. He couldn't be omnipresent in his human self. Yet at the same time, when God became man, he didn't forfeit his divine attributes. So Jesus remained omnipresent in his divine nature, and yet is living in his human nature. Now, sometimes that's tough to comprehend, but I think that's what Donne's getting at here.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
No. I mean, I think that's good. Let's go.
Doing good? All right. So we'll continue on. Next line. "Ere by the spear's time was created, thou wast in his mind." So the poet shifts from talking about Jesus to talking to the faithful virgin, to talking to Mary. And he says, before time was created, Mary was in Jesus's mind. So here, the one who would give birth to the Christ was in the Christ mind before the birth. And so we're kind of getting into the incomprehensibility of this, right? He is your son and brother. We know the way in which Jesus is the son of Mary, but how is he the mother of Mary? What is Donne talking about there? You want to take a stab at that?
Mother. So can you say
brother?
That?
Yeah.
Brother.
How is he the brother?
Okay. So, well, I think and that's always been an interesting thing that we see is that Christ is her son, but also in terms of I think about I can't remember the psalm, but I remember it's mentioned in Hebrews. I will sing to you in the midst of many brothers. There's kind of this that Jesus is our brother in the sense that he's human. Now I just did my stab at it, so I could be completely wrong. But in the sense that he is that he is human in human flesh. He is our brother, and so we're co-heirs with him. So,
absolutely. That's exactly how I would describe it. Specifically the co-heir aspect of it. Paul talks about in Romans how we are adopted into the family of God.
Yeah.
And Jesus is our elder brother.
Yeah.
That goes before us. That secures for us. We had a question last night. One of our kids asked me, "How are we in Jesus' family tree? Like, what is our relation to Jesus?" And he was a little concerned about the brother. He said, "Stepbrother?" I was like, "No, that's not quite what we're talking about here."
He's a stepbrother who steals your blue jeans.
Yeah. So that's what Jesus is for us. Anyway, he continues on. He says, "Whom thou conceived, yea, thou art now thy maker's maker and thy father's mother." It kind of reminds me of the old SNL skit that became the movie The Stupids. You remember that?
I don't think
Oh man, you've missed out on it. As you can imagine, it wasn't high comedy. It wasn't very highbrow. But they sing the parody song "I'm My Own Grandpa" in there.
Oh, so that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's where. Okay. I don't know if that's where it comes from, but it certainly. As a kid, I remember watching that.
Yeah.
That's not quite what John Donne is saying. I know sometimes we can get into some weird family relations.
Yeah.
But he's talking about how Mary is placed in this position where she indeed becomes the mother of God. We can talk about that. Yeah. Though God has no creator, in the person of Jesus, Mary conceives. Mm-hmm. The Holy Spirit conceives in Mary's womb this Jesus, and so she is her maker's maker in a sense. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to elevate Mary to the status of a divine being. That's not what we're saying here. But we are trying to wrap our minds around this concept of the enfleshment of Jesus, that he put on flesh and he placed himself in the position of going through the normal way that humans live, through birth, through life, through death. He stepped into our world. He stepped into our place.
Yep.
And some of this is, as we talk about whom thou conceived. This is referring to a doctrine, has a fancy name in Latin. That's called the Extra Calvinisticum. Once again, big name, but essentially what it means is that that this Jesus, this infant child, this human Jesus, was simultaneously divine, and so in while Jesus was born, even while he was in Mary's womb, he maintained the cosmos by his divine power. And this is a beautiful thought, right? That the infant Jesus grasping onto Mary's finger was also the one who held the world in his hand. So any thoughts on that to piggyback?
No, that's always been a beautiful doctrine, and with our Advent service coming up, there's a song called "How Low Is Our Redeemer Brought," and it's just this just beautiful song that points us to like there's a line, "How low is our Redeemer brought, he stumbled as he learned to walk upon the ground he made." And then just this beautiful picture of he's the creator of everything, and yet he had to learn to walk. That Jesus understands a child, like the challenges a 2-year-old child or a 1-year-old child has with trying to walk. I just think that's fascinating, and I think it continues why he is such a great high priest. He knows what it is to be 100% human.
Right.
So,
the ancient church used to say those things that he did not take on, he could not redeem. And so that's a reminder to us that Jesus took on not just our flesh, but he took on a human mind, that he had a human nature. And because he had these things, he's able to redeem those things. He became one of us so that he could raise us up so we could become like him. Continuing on with this last line here, which I love the line that his Donne's holy sonnets. There's several of them, and all of them, the ending of the poem becomes the beginning of the next poem. And so here he says, "Thou hast light and dark, and shuttest in little room, immensity cloistered in thy dear womb." So here, Donne is speaking of Jesus in the womb of Mary in that darkness, and yet here's the light of the world in darkness. And talking about the little room, right? He is immensity. He fills all things. He is all things, and yet he is cloistered in Mary's womb. That word cloister means to be enclosed or to be kept away from the outside world. It has connotations of a monastery. And indeed, as Jesus is cloistered in the womb of Mary, he is preparing for his earthly mission. And even in the womb of Mary is ministering, right? As we think about as Mary comes to visit Elizabeth, and John the Baptist in the womb responds to the Christ child in the womb, which is once again another reminder of the worth of humans and the worth of people, that Christ would become a child, and not just a child, but he would become a fetus in a womb. That would be the way in which he entered into the world.
I also think there's in our world there's kind of this Gnostic idea about our bodies being bad in some way. Whether and that there's something wrong with our bodies. It's something to be corrected. And I think with one thing, I was listening to a podcast that was about transhumanism, which I was talking about not transgender. That's talking about people adding things to their body,
right?
Because the
like
human body, implants, and
brain implants.
And where does that end in terms of being a grace and being a gift and being something? But I think the fact that Jesus came as human, like he had a physical body, just points us to how important, like you said, life is sacred, but also God has fashioned our bodies to be as they are.
I love you mentioned that Gnosticism, which in some way splits soul and matter. Matter is bad, soul is good. And I feel like we it's like you said, we still wrestle with this today. We don't use those words, but there's a great battle between soul and body that is working out even on the world stage right now. That we say that we pit them against each other, and we emphasize one over the other. And so this can take many forms, right? The church can say, we care about your soul, we want you to be saved, but at the same time, we're not going to meet your physical need. We're not going to bring you food. And James says, show me your faith. And if you say to your brother who is cold, go and be warm, but you don't meet that need, you have no faith. So that's one way we can do it. And then you see it also. You mentioned in the transgender movement, you see that of fighting against soul and body. And yet, what Jesus shows us is that both are good. And both belong together, that we are soul and body. We're not just body, we're not just matter, we're not just soul. Both of them matter, and we have an obligation now to steward them well, and to speak of their worth. And what better way to do that than to say, your body is good. How do you know that? Because Jesus took on a body. Right? Jesus didn't shun that. He could have. He could have come in some other form, and yet he chose to put on.
One application that kind of came to mind is, when you mentioned that which Christ didn't take on, remind me of the phrase.
It's that which he assumed, that which he did not assume, he could not redeem.
He could not redeem. So in thinking about Christ taking on flesh, this idea that I feel like we can easily think that Christ has only come to redeem our insides, our spirit, our hearts, but to know that when we follow Christ, when we accept Christ, when we have Him as our Savior, is that the cross not only redeems our hearts and our minds, but it redeems our bodies. And I think one image we see in the New Testament, as Paul talks about, that we are living sacrifices, that we are to present our bodies as that. And so, and thinking about the cross has something to say about how we treat our bodies, how we use our bodies.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say my application of this would be often we look for God to work in the big things, and certainly the incarnation is a big thing that God did. And yet, the way in which he accomplished this magnificent story, this magnificent act of redemption, was through the ordinary. It was through the small, through the womb of a young teenage Jewish girl. And I think in our life, when we're looking for God to do those big things, and we're looking for him on the mountaintop, we sometimes forget the many little areas that God is working, and that God is shaming the wise with the foolish things. And so my application for us would be, don't discount those little rooms in your life that God is working in a mighty way. That you'd be surprised where you would find immensity cloistered if we just have the eyes to look. So thank you all so much for being here today for our 12 Poems of Christmas. We hope that you are enjoying this. I think one of the things to say in conclusion is that neither Brandon nor I have degrees in poetry. So so these are just some of our thoughts and our applications. And so we hope that y'all are enjoying it, and we hope that it's edifying you. So we'll join you next week with another poem from our 12 Poems of Christmas.